I'm on a beach called Porangahau Beach, which is in the Southern Hawke's Bay. I drove down here last night from Kiumu, where I've been living for the last 2 months. I'm driving down to the Wairarapa today to visit some friends in the Wairarapa, and then I'm heading over to the Kapiti Coast. After that, for about 3 days, 4 days, then I'm back to Wellington for a night, and then I'm off to the South Island for 3 months. And my 2 months in Auckland were quite tumultuous in so many ways, and I had so many huge lessons and so many varying degrees of experience. I was listening to a really powerful and poignant Alan Watts talk yesterday while I was driving down here, and my day progressed quite interestingly. The night before I left, it was pissing down with rain in Auckland. It was absolutely bucketing down like monsoon season, so I saw this as a blessing for me, clearing my path as I moved out of Auckland and moving south. It was a blessing as the way was cleared for me. The energy of the 2 months was washed away. That's the way I perceived it, as a blessing. And I left yesterday morning. It was raining in Auckland, quite humid. And I got down about as far as Cambridge, just about an hour, a little over an hour from Auckland, and it began to fine up. I got to Rotorua and I had a very cool experience at Butcher's Pool in Rotorua, where whenever I go down into the water, or go into the water here, say for example here, the ocean here, I'll go for a swim after this video. I'll go into the ocean for a swim before I leave Porangahau and head down to the Wairarapa. I got up this morning for sunrise about 5:30 this morning. Got up, just as I got up, the sun was rising by my van out over the ocean. I had the clear view of the sun rising up over the ocean here, over the east coast of Te Ika a Maui, the North Island. It's beautiful. About 5:40 in the morning. There was not a breath of wind between sunset last night and sunrise. There's a little bit of wind this morning, but yesterday it was so windy, it was crazy. But at Rotorua yesterday at Butcher's Pool, I went down to I go down to the water and I ask for permission to enter into the water. I ask for the elementals, the spirits and devas and deities of the place that I'm actually at before I enter into the water, if I have permission to enter into the water. And I did that. I asked for permission, I got a big granted yes. So I went into this healing water, this beautiful healing geothermal water, mineral rich water, and I soaked in the water for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And there's a woman in a van by herself, and she's quite a Venus figurine. She's very voluptuous in her own way, but incredibly powerful and beautiful. And this video I'm making is about woman and the power of woman, but this is a classic example of what I'm leading into. So when I first arrived, I saw her getting ready to come down into the water. She was very trusting, very open, and very coherent with the environment. As I drove in, I could feel her energy. She was very calm, very poised, very centered in everything she did. She was very purposeful. That's the power of woman, very purposeful. And she came down to the water when I was in the water. I watched her come down towards the water, and she did exactly the same thing I did, but on a whole nother level. As she walked down step to step, there's 3 steps entering into the pool. I saw her stop at the top step, begin her silent prayer with her eyes closed, and then move to the 2nd step, continue her prayer, and got to the 3rd step, where she stopped and she put her feet into the water, and then her prayer really began in earnest. And then I watched her slowly make her way into the pool. It was like a goddess or a high priestess coming into a sacred temple. It was incredible to watch. And as she came into the water, I saw her open up into her feminine wiles, and her energy just began to pervade the environment. I quietly got out of the water behind her, up the steps, and walked back to my van and got dressed. And I looked down to see what she was up to before I left, out of my front vision mirror. Looking out towards the pool, I could see her meditating on the pool, the middle pool step, with her feet in the water. And as I started my engine up, she turned around and looked at me, and I just waved. I waved at her, and she waved at me, and she went back into meditation again. It was fucking amazing. A non-verbal communication, and a great sense of reverence and awe for me, and the way that she conducted herself. It was a lesson for me. And one of the big lessons I had yesterday was when I saw my friend Jenna yesterday in Taupo, I haven't seen since July. I saw her in Taupo. I was driving through Taupo and Lake Taupo region, in Taupo town. And she called me and she said, I just saw your van drive past. What are you up to? I was like, oh, Jenna, I haven't seen her for like 5 months. So I pulled in, we had a bit of a chat, and we were talking about the nature of connection and where we were at in our lives, because we haven't seen each other for 5 months. And it triggered me to remember the experience I just had, but it also triggered me in regards to the nature of what she was talking about, how she found that men that she connected with had a lack of emotionality in regards to how they could actually open themselves to feel safe in connection with women. And because of that, they closed off. And by closing off to a woman in the way that they needed to open up, well, when the woman asked them and created the container to be open with them and feel safe and surrender and trust in them, they just couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. These men couldn't do it. And I tell you what, all my life until about 4, 6, 7 years ago, I couldn't do that either. I didn't feel safe in my emotionality because my father never taught me, because my father was basically absent from my life for most of my childhood. And then from 9 onwards, I saw him briefly once a week. Due to the nature of my trauma and my decision to leave my father when my parents divorced and live with my mother, I never had a strong mentor, a man in my life through all my adolescent teenage years. I never had that until I was in my 20s. So I never really learned about emotionality and about supporting a woman, about stepping into the power that a woman creates when the container is open for you to step into emotionally and to be able to be vulnerable, to trust, to surrender to a woman when she opens that container up for you to feel safe, to express yourself emotionally. I never had that as a kid. Never had it. Never learnt the experience. So most of my connections and relationships, I never had the ability to truly open up in the way that when a woman presents herself in a way that she surrenders and trusts you, and as a lover, as a friend, as a partner, when she opens up emotionally for you. I've experienced this many, many times through friends, family members, lovers, partners. When they open up to you, they create that container for you to be safe, to express your emotions safely, to be vulnerable, to be authentic and real and honest. And this is part of the Alan Watts talk as well. The whole day yesterday was incredible. All the synchronicities lining up for me to make this video today about the nature of emotionality, authenticity, and integrity, and also understanding, most importantly, when a woman creates that container for you to be able to be open and express yourself emotionally as a man. I'm talking about man to woman here, not woman to woman or men to men. I'm talking about man to woman in regards to the connection here. What I learned yesterday when I was not triggered, but I had this revelation, this epiphany around this experience, is that most men that I've known, lack the emotional ability to be able to step into that space and be vulnerable. And a lot of women I know as well have their lack of accountability to step the other way due to the nature of their issues with their fathers, not being supportive, emotionally supportive, not hearing them or seeing them or experiencing the landing of the emotionality of a woman, because they got no idea what it means to interact with a woman in this way, their daughters, their wives, their friends, who open up to them and create this container because they can't be vulnerable, they can't be authentic and honest and real with women because they feel there's a fear of rejection, humiliation, be made a fool of, judgment. All these things come up from men. I'm not saying generalizing the situation, or stereotypically saying all men are like this. I'm just saying, in my experience, for me, I felt that if I opened up and became emotionally, and my emotionality came out of my connection with a woman, I often felt like I was in a place of vulnerability, where I could be humiliated, rejected, or judged. And that for me was a big fear, and the fear kept me from coming to a place where I was able to do that with a woman. But also being vulnerable, open, authentic, and honest sometimes means setting hard boundaries with women as well. I had an example of that over in Auckland when I was with somebody, for a former lover, who I felt with her wounds, whenever I talked to her, whenever I said something to her, whenever I laid my vulnerability out, my authenticity out with her and told her how I felt, what was going on for me, when I did all those things, I could only be who I was and say what I wanted to say and be open and honest and let my heart speak to her. But what I got back from her, when I said to her, it was like what she said back to me was like another language. It was completely different to what I said. Everything that I said to her passed through her filters, her wounds, her traumas around her childhood, around her lack of her father being in her life, her birth father. And those wounds, as what I said to her, passed through those wounds and those traumas and those triggers and those experiences. What I got back, said back to me in regards, this is what she said to me, is like, this is what I heard from you, da 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 da, and none of it was what I said. It was like, whoa, and I saw that firsthand. But like the container was open, so we were able to communicate with each other and find a way to have resolution. And the only way in that experience I actually learned about the way that everything I said to her would land is if we sat next to each other and looked at each other eye in the eye, looked at each other in the eyes, and had the non-verbal cues as well with our connection and our communication. Because without that, we were lost. We were lost. And that was, the container was open for that experience to happen. And what it showed me was that in my experience, in my, not judgment, but my perception of the connection with this woman, there was a neediness and also a feeling of codependency that didn't sit right with me. So I set a hard boundary with that situation because it didn't feel comfortable for me and I didn't feel safe in that environment. You know, so this is the nature of the container that was open. And when it was open, I went into that place full vulnerability. But in my vulnerability, in my authenticity, I also set a hard boundary with this individual. And what happened from there was that individual took it as personal, took it as hard, took it as a way that it was detrimental to our connection. And for me, it wasn't detrimental. For me, it was quite simply, I needed to do this. For me, self-nurturing, self-love, because I knew that in that container, I began to feel unsafe due to the nature of what I was experiencing. I wasn't available for that experience. I made that quite clear all along. But the container was open, and she held me in that container, and that was a powerful experience for me, a very powerful experience. The last thing I want to say before I leave this video, turn it off, is it's getting dark behind me here. As you can see, the sun's going behind the clouds. Hope you can still see me. I'm going to move it around, the camera around a little bit so you can see me a bit better, hopefully. There we go. Okay. So, the last thing I want to say was that I was in a sweat lodge, a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge, about 4 weeks ago now. 4 weeks ago? Jeez. 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago. And in that lodge, women had to cover their shoulders and their knees. And it was, you know, I don't know if you've done a lodge before, like a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge, but it is fucking brutal. Brutal. And I was at the front of the mouth of the lodge, bringing in the grandfathers from the firekeeper and put them into the pit. And the women were all around the back of the lodge, and they're all covered up in their sarongs and basically fully dressed. And I was in awe. I was in absolute awe of the container that they created. 6 women, 4 men. 6 women, 4 men. And they created this container, and this container in that lodge to hold the space. The women in that lodge, you could feel it. They stepped into their power and they held the space. They held the space, the container. They created the container and held it through their energy. And you could feel it because it was brutal in there. But their strength, their power, their grace, their poise, I could feel it, how much the mothers were holding, coming through them. This womb, the great earth mother, was coming through them. These goddesses, and they were holding the space for the men in there, and for everyone else, and for themselves, of course, as well. But you could feel that power. There's no man on earth that can ever wield a power like that. Forget about it. No way. There's no man on earth that can ever wield a power like that. These beings have the ability to hold and carry life as it grows within them. In that container, in that lodge, they held that space for us to feel safe. I felt like I was dying a couple of times during that sit. It was that fucking intense. It was that brutal. Like there was a couple of times when the door was open during sittings. I was on my knees, praying in my humbleness, brought down in my humility to actually stop and just breathe, pray deeply to be able to get through the experience. It was that fucking brutal. But this woman, they held that container. And for wasn't for them, I think I wouldn't have made it through. I mean that sincerely and honestly. That is the power of a woman. Power to open the container up for a man to feel vulnerable enough to be able to feel vulnerable and to trust and to surrender to that vulnerability, to be emotional, to bring his emotionality out and not feel judged, humiliated, or what's the third one? Judged, humiliated, or made fun of. Same thing as humiliation, I guess. But to be able to do that, for a woman to do that for a man, it's the greatest gift she can ever give a man, I feel. Next to opening her portal of her heart during sex, to allow the multiverse and the man to reconnect with each other in a way that only she can. Women are amazing and powerful, powerful beings. I'm in deep awe and gratitude of that power. Thanks for watching, I truly appreciate it. Mate wa. I'll see you again soon. I go for a swim.